The first time I realized something was wrong, it was a Thursday afternoon. The sky outside my studio was bright and calm, the kind of day that never prepares you for betrayal. My phone buzzed on the counter, a new notification lighting up the screen. When I saw the image, my stomach turned cold. It was my sister Clara smiling into the camera hand, raised proudly, showing off an engagement ring that wasn't hers. My ring. The caption read, "He chose the wrong sister." At first I thought it had to be a mistake, a cruel filter of déjà vu. The ring was unmistakable. The custom diamond cut the thin rose gold band, the engraving Ethan and I had chosen together until calm returns. I zoomed in, hoping my eyes were lying. They weren't. Beneath the post were hundreds of laughing emojis and comments from her followers calling her bold, playful, hilarious. Then among the likes I saw another named Mom. She'd commented a string of hearts. I stood frozen in my kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator suddenly louder than my own heartbeat. The coffee in my hand went cold. I read the caption again, and this time it hit like a punch. Clara hadn't just borrowed my ring. She'd mocked everything it stood for. I called Ethan immediately. He picked up on the second ring, his voice soft but tired. "Hey, hon. Everything okay? Did you see it?" I asked, my throat dry. He hesitated. "The post? Yeah. I thought maybe it was a joke." "It's not," he sighed. "I'll call her." Maybe she didn't realize. She realized. My voice cracked before I could stop it. She always realizes. She just doesn't care. There was silence on the line, the kind that stretches too long and says too much. Ethan finally murmured, "Do you want me to go over there?" "No," I said, forcing calm into my tone. "I'll handle it." When the call ended, I stood by the window watching cars move through the quiet Portland street. My reflection looked pale in the glass, older, smaller somehow. Clara and I had always fought over small things growing up, clothes space, attention. But this wasn't small, this was deliberate. By the time I got to Mom's house, the air already smelled like her favorite vanilla candles, and Clara's perfumes sweet and overbearing. I could hear them laughing in the living room before I even opened the door. "There she is," Mom greeted when she saw me, her smile wide, too bright. "We were just talking about you." I stared at Clara. She was sitting cross-legged on the couch, still wearing the ring. It sparkled every time she lifted her hand to flip her hair. "Take it off," I said quietly. Clara blinked, pretending innocence. "Take what off?" "You know what?" She looked down at her hand, feigning surprise. "Oh, this relax, Hannah. It's just a ring. It's my ring." Mom laughed lightly, the sound brittle. "Sweetheart, don't be dramatic. It's just for a photo." Clara's followers loved it. "It's good fun." "Good fun," I repeated. She took my engagement ring, Mom. "The one Ethan gave me." Clara tilted her head. "I didn't take it. It was sitting right there on your vanity. I thought you wouldn't mind if I borrowed it for a picture. You left it out. That doesn't make it yours." "Oh, come on. You're overreacting." That word overreacting hit me like static. It was the same thing they'd told me when Clara ruined my prom dress, when she took my art supplies, when she copied my college essay for a scholarship. Every time I'd been told to let it go, to be the bigger person. But each time I let something go, it took a piece of me with it. Mom reached for my arm. "Hannah, don't start another scene. You know how sensitive your sister is." I stepped back. Sensitive. She humiliated me in front of thousands of people. Clara scoffed. "No one even knows it's your ring. They will." She smirked, a lazy little twist of her lips. "What are you going to do? Write an angry post? Cry about it?" I felt my jaw tighten. My hands shook, not from rage but from restraint. "You've crossed a line, Clara," she shrugged. "Lines are just suggestions." Mom's voice sharpened. "Enough, both of you. I won't have this drama under my roof." I turned toward her. "Then, maybe you should have stopped it before it started." Her face hardened. "You always find a way to ruin the mood. Your sister's wedding is coming up. Can't you just be happy for her?" "Happy," I whispered. "She stole my ring and mocked me online." Mom sighed. "Hannah, life isn't fair. You've always been stronger. Be the mature one. Be the mature one. There it was again, the quiet command that had defined my whole life. Every injustice smoothed over with that one sentence. I used to believe it made me good. Now it just made me invisible. I didn't answer. I turned toward the door, my heart pounding in my throat. Behind me, Clara called out, "Don't worry, sis. Maybe Ethan will buy you another one. A smaller diamond might suit you better anyway." Mom laughed, soft, indulgent, the way she always did when Clara was cruel. I walked out without another word. The air outside was sharp, clean, almost punishing. I stood by my car, gripping the handle until my knuckles whitened. For years I'd told myself that family meant forgiveness. But standing there humiliated yet again, I realized forgiveness without accountability isn't love, it's surrender. When I got home, the first thing I did was open my jewelry box. The velvet slot where my ring belonged was empty, a hollow space that felt too familiar. I sat down and stared at it, the quiet pressing in from all sides. My phone buzzed with new notifications, comments, tags, gossip. I didn't look. Instead, I opened my laptop, pulled up the invoice from Lawson Jewelers, and found the serial number printed at the bottom. For a long moment, I hovered over the keyboard. Then, slowly, I typed an email, subject missing property report, engagement ring rose gold custom engraving. I attached the receipt and wrote just one line before hitting send, registered owner Hannah Bennett. Then I sat back, letting the hum of the computer fill the silence. It wasn't revenge yet. It was clarity. Cold, clean, and overdue. Outside, the late afternoon light poured through the blinds, casting lines across the floor. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel smaller for staying quiet. I felt stronger for finally letting the silence speak for me. The next morning, my phone was still buzzing with notifications. I didn't open any of them. I already knew what they said, laughing emojis, snide comments, people tagging Clara's post with number sister goals. My ring had gone viral. Not because of love, not because of Ethan's proposal, but because my sister knew how to turn cruelty into entertainment. When I finally gathered enough courage to face the day I drove to Mom's house again, her silver car was already in the driveway, and I could hear laughter coming from the kitchen before I even stepped inside. It was the same sound that used to mean comfort when I was little now. It only made my stomach twist. Mom was at the stove flipping pancakes, and Clara sat at the counter scrolling through her phone. "Morning sunshine," Mom said, not looking up. "We're just celebrating Clara's post hitting 20,000 likes. Clara raised her coffee cup, grinning. "Guess I'm an influencer now." I stood in the doorway trying to steady my voice. "You turned my engagement ring into a joke." Clara looked up, feigning surprise. "Oh, come on, Hannah. It's just a ring. Don't be so uptight." Mom laughed lightly. "Honestly, sweetheart, you should be flattered. It looked beautiful on her hand. People were complimenting the design. You have good taste." "It's not about taste," I said slowly. "It's about respect." Mom finally turned, spatula in hand. "Respect for a ring, Hannah, you've always been so dramatic." That word again. Dramatic. Like all my pain was a performance. Ethan walked in from the backyard holding a plate of fruit. His voice was gentle but firm. "Mrs. Elaine, with all due respect, that ring cost months of saving. It wasn't meant for a photo shoot." Mom sighed as if we were children interrupting her favorite show. "Ethan, no one's accusing anyone of theft. Clara was just having fun." Clara leaned forward on her elbows, a spark of mischief in her eyes. "Besides, I tagged you in the caption. You got some new followers out of it." "You're welcome." The room fell silent. Ethan looked at me, but I couldn't meet his eyes. My jaw clenched, heat rising behind my ribs. "Clara," I said quietly, "take the post down." She smirked. "Why? People love it. It's harmless. It's humiliating. Only if you let it be." I exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of every memory pressing against me. The time she wore my prom dress and spilled wine on it. The day she took credit for my art project. The way Mom always said she didn't mean it, as if that erased everything. Mom set the pancakes on the table, her tone brisk. Girls, stop. You sound ridiculous. Hannah, you're too sensitive. You always have been. I turned to her. You call it sensitive. I call it human. Ethan reached for my hand. Under the table, a quiet gesture that grounded me. But I saw the look in his eyes. He was tired. Tired of the same story repeating. Clara scrolled through her phone, again ignoring us. Even Lawson Jewelers commented, she said. They said the craftsmanship is stunning. Something in me went still. Lawson. The jeweler. She didn't even realize how deep her mistake went. I forced a breath. You shouldn't be showing that ring off. The serial numbers registered to me. Clara rolled her eyes. What are you going to do, sue me? Mom laughed, as if the idea were absurd. Sweetheart, you can't sue your sister. We're family. I looked at both of them, the mother who never saw me, the sister who took everything I loved, and for a moment, I felt something strange. Not anger. Clarity. After breakfast, I followed Clara out onto the porch. The air smelled like wet pine and coffee. Give it back, I said softly. She turned, sunlight catching the ring. You can't claim what was never yours to begin with. My chest tightened. What do you mean? Clara smiled, the kind of smile she used when she wanted to wound. Ethan always looked at me first. You just got lucky, he settled. I froze. The words sank in slow and deep. You're lying. Am I? She whispered. You can ask Mom. She's always known. I took a step back, gripping the railing. You're unbelievable. No, she said sweetly. I'm honest. I stared at her for a long time, then said, You knew that ring meant something to me? You knew what you were doing, she shrugged. You take things too seriously. That's your problem. Then here's yours, I said, my voice low. You think everything's a game until someone stops playing. For the first time, her smile faltered. When I walked back inside, Mom was pouring more coffee, humming like nothing had happened. Everything okay, sweetheart? No, I said. She sighed. Don't let Clara get under your skin. She's under a lot of pressure with the wedding coming up. Just be the bigger person, okay? There it was again, the family gospel. Be the bigger person. Stay quiet. Swallow it. I smiled faintly, but it wasn't kindness. I've been the bigger person my whole life, Mom. All it ever did was make me smaller. Her expression tightened. You're being disrespectful. No, I said. I'm being honest. She shook her head and turned away, muttering something about ungrateful daughters. By the time I left, the laughter had returned. Through the open window, I could hear Clara's voice, bright and careless. She'll get over it. She always does. But I didn't. Back home, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at my reflection. I didn't look like someone's daughter or someone's fiancé. I looked like a ghost of my own patience. When the phone buzzed again, I knew who it was before I looked. Another notification from Clara. A new story. This time she'd posted a video, her hand tilted toward the camera, the ring catching sunlight as she laughed. Some people just can't handle a little joke, the caption read. Below it, Mom had commented again. Beautiful as always, honey. I felt something in my chest snap, not rage, but resolve. I took a screenshot of the post, saved it, and set my phone face down. Then I opened my drawer and pulled out a small notebook. Inside were sketches of floral arches, dress ideas, details of my own wedding that might never happen now. On the last page, I wrote a single line: silence isn't peace, it's just waiting for the right moment. I closed the book, exhaled slowly, and whispered to the empty room, enjoy your moment, Clara. You won't have it for long. Outside, rain began to fall, soft, steady, deliberate. The kind that doesn't flood, just seeps in quietly until everything is soaked. The dinner invitation came in the family group chat 2 days later. Sunday night. Family dinner. No drama this time, Mom wrote, punctuated with a winking emoji. It was her favorite way of pretending everything was fine, turn it into a joke, hide the bruise under politeness. I stared at the message for a while, then typed, I'll be there, before I could talk myself out of it. Ethan asked if I was sure. No, I said, But if I don't go, it'll just be another story they tell about me. Sunday evening came dressed in soft rain. I stood outside my parents' house, the same two-story colonial I'd grown up in, still smelling faintly of gardenias and control. Through the window I saw silhouettes, Mom moving between the kitchen and dining table, Clara showing something on her phone to Dad. Everything looked so familiar it almost tricked me into nostalgia. But then I saw the flash of the ring on her hand, and the illusion shattered. When I walked in, Mom greeted me like a hostess, not a mother. "Sweetheart, you made it. Come in, dinner's almost ready." Dad appeared behind her, smiling nervously. "Hey kiddo, good to see you." Clara was at the table, perfectly composed, like the previous argument had never happened. She waved a manicured hand. "Yes, the one wearing my ring. Hi sis. I was just telling Mom about the wedding venue. We booked the Seafront Grand. Can you believe it?" I took a deep breath, forcing a small smile. "Congratulations." "Thank you," she said sweetly, as if the word didn't taste like poison. Mom motioned toward the table. "Let's eat before it gets cold." The food smelled amazing: roasted chicken potatoes, her famous lemon pie, comfort on a plate. But the air was tense, heavy with all the words we weren't saying. Clara started talking about her wedding plans, her voice filling every corner of the room. "We're doing white orchids for the altar, and I'm thinking of a champagne theme for the reception." Mom beamed. "That sounds elegant. Hannah, don't you think so?" I looked up from my plate. "Sure. You always had good taste," Mom continued, pouring wine into Clara's glass. "Maybe you could help your sister with some of the design details. You're so organized." Clara laughed. "Oh, I think I've got it handled." "But thanks." It was subtle, that little dig, but it landed all the same. Halfway through dinner, Dad tried to lighten the mood. "So, Hannah, how's work? You still doing photography?" "Yeah," I said quietly. "Mostly freelance now." Mom sighed a familiar sound. "Freelance, such an unstable thing. You really should consider something more secure." "You're 34, Hannah. It's time to think about the future." Clara chimed in with a smirk. "She's thinking about it, Mom. Maybe not the way we do, but she's trying." Mom laughed. "Oh, stop, don't tease her." "I'm not teasing, Clara," said her voice honeyed and cruel. "I just mean she likes creative freedom." I set down my fork, forcing my voice steady. "Clara, if you're trying to make a point, just make it." She blinked innocently. "I don't know what you mean." Mom's tone shifted, sharp and authoritative. "Enough. We're not doing this again. You two are sisters. We should be celebrating, not fighting." "You mean pretending," I said before I could stop myself. Mom's eyes flashed. "Excuse me," I met her gaze. "Every time something like this happens, you tell me to be quiet, to keep the peace. But peace doesn't mean silence, Mom. It just means you're comfortable while I choke on my own words." The room froze. The only sound was the ticking of the old wall clock. Clara's smile tightened. "You're really going to ruin dinner over a ring." "It's not about the ring," I said, my voice low but firm. "It's about you never thinking twice before taking something that isn't yours." She leaned back in her chair, eyes glinting. "You know what's funny? For someone who claims to be so wronged, you sure love playing the victim." I laughed softly. "You're right. I do love playing the victim. It's the only role you left open." Dad shifted uncomfortably. "Girls, please," Mom cut him off. "Hannah, I think you owe your sister an apology. This jealousy has gone too far." "Jealousy?" I repeated. "You think I'm jealous of someone who steals for attention?" Mom slammed her hand against the table. "Enough. You're acting like a child." I looked at her calmly. "And you're acting like her accomplice." Her mouth opened, but no words came. The silence that followed was thick, humming like static. I could feel Ethan's absence like an ache. If he'd been here, he might have tried to calm me. But maybe I didn't need calming anymore. Finally, Clara broke the quiet. "You know what? This is pathetic. I'm not doing this. Mom, can you tell her to leave?" Mom didn't look at me. "Maybe you should go, Hannah. You're upsetting everyone." There it was, the family pattern, repeating like a song on loop. I stood my chair, scraping against the floor. You're right, I said softly. I should go. I wouldn't want to ruin your perfect picture. As I reached the doorway, I heard Clara mutter, maybe next time she'll remember who the real favorite is. I didn't turn around. I just walked out into the rain. Outside, the air was cold and clean. My breath came out in sharp clouds. I stood on the porch staring at the soft yellow light spilling from the dining room window. Inside, my family had already gone back to laughing, pretending nothing had happened. For a moment, I almost walked back in, almost tried to fix it, to explain myself one more time. But then I remembered every time I'd done that before, and how nothing had ever changed. I got into my car and started the engine. My reflection in the rearview mirror looked like a stranger's, someone tired, someone done being erased. The drive home felt longer than usual. The rain tapped against the windshield in a slow, steady rhythm. When I reached my apartment, I didn't turn on the lights. I sat in the dark, listening to the hum of the city. I thought about what Clara had said, about Mom's words, about all the times I'd swallowed my anger to keep the family intact. Then I remembered something Mr. Lawson had said when Ethan and I bought the ring. Every diamond tells a story. Just make sure yours is worth the wear. I looked down at my empty hand and whispered, maybe it's time to write a new one. Before going to bed, I opened my laptop. Clara's post was still there. 23,000 likes now, her laughter echoing through the short clip. I clicked on the share button, copied the link, and pasted it into a private message addressed to Mr. Lawson Jewelers. The message was simple. Please note, this ring, serial number 74BN01, was never transferred. Original owner Hannah Bennett. I hit send and closed my laptop. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky, soft and distant. It didn't scare me. It sounded almost like applause. The next morning, the sky was pale gray and the city felt like it was holding its breath. My phone buzzed, non-stop notifications, messages, half curious, half judgmental texts from people I hadn't spoken to in years. Somehow, Clara's latest stunt had made its way onto a local gossip page. Someone had reposted her. He chose the wrong sister picture with the caption, "Sisters or Rivals, Portland's drama queens go viral." I didn't respond. I didn't even open Instagram. I just stared at the screen until the light dimmed and let it go dark. Around noon, Ethan came over, knocking softly before letting himself in. He looked tired, the kind of tired that comes from trying to be diplomatic in a war with no winners. "You okay?" he asked, setting down 2 coffees. "Define okay," I said. He sighed and sat across from me. "Your sister called me this morning." I stiffened. "What did she want?" she said. "You're blowing things out of proportion. That it was just a misunderstanding." I let out a sharp laugh. "Is that what we're calling theft now? Misunderstanding?" He rubbed the back of his neck. She sounded scared, actually. "Said you were threatening to ruin her reputation." I looked at him, incredulous. "Her reputation, Ethan? She stole my ring and humiliated me in front of thousands of people. I haven't said a word publicly. That's her idea of threatened." He hesitated, eyes flicking down to his hands. "Hannah, I know she crossed a line, but your mom's worried this could blow up even more." I stood pacing. "Of course she's worried about that. She's not worried about me. She's worried about how it looks." Ethan's voice softened. "You know how your mom is. She wants to keep the peace." "Peace spilt on my silence," I said, turning to him. "That's not peace, Ethan. That's control." He didn't argue. He just looked at me like he'd finally run out of words to fix things with. That afternoon, Mom called. I didn't want to answer, but the guilt, that old reflex I hadn't yet unlearned, made me swipe right. "Hannah," she began, her tone too calm, too careful. "We need to talk about this mess before it gets worse." I sat on the edge of my bed, gripping the phone. "What mess? The one Clara created or the one you're pretending I caused, Hannah? Please," she sighed. "You know how impulsive your sister is. She didn't mean to hurt you. She never means to, Mom. But somehow she always does, and you always clean it up for her." "She's under stress," Mom said quickly. The wedding's only 2 months away. You could be more understanding. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Understanding. She took my engagement ring and mocked me online. Her tone hardened. And now you're planning to embarrass her further. I heard you contacted the jeweler. I froze. Who told you that she did? And I don't appreciate you dragging our family business into public. People talk, Hannah. You're making this bigger than it needs to be. I swallowed the lump in my throat. You think I'm making it bigger? She stole from me. You're overreacting, she snapped, her patience cracking. You always have been. You were like this as a child, so sensitive. Something in me went quiet then, like a door closing. I'm not a child anymore, Mom, I said softly. And I'm done being the quiet one. Before she could reply, I hung up. For a long time, I just sat there, staring at the silent phone in my hand. My fingers were trembling, but my chest felt strangely calm. It wasn't peace. It was resolve. By evening, the air had turned heavy with the scent of rain. I made myself tea and sat by the window watching cars blur past in streaks of gray. My reflection looked tired, but there was something steadier behind the exhaustion. At 7, my dad called. He never called unless Mom told him to. Hannah, he said awkwardly. Your mother says things are getting tense between you and Clara. They've been tense since I was 5, I replied. He sighed. You know how your mother gets, she just wants to protect everyone. By silencing me, he paused. You could have handled it differently. Handled what? Having my sister steal from me. Dad, what would you have done? He didn't answer right away. I just want peace in the family. You know that. I know, I said quietly. That's the problem. He exhaled, the sound weary and familiar. You're stronger than this, Hannah. I looked out the window, the rain tapping the glass like a heartbeat. No, Dad. I'm just done pretending strength means silence. He didn't know how to respond. Just, don't do anything rash. Okay. I smiled faintly, though he couldn't see it. Don't worry. I'm not angry anymore. When I hung up, I realized it was true. I wasn't angry. I was clear. Later that night, Tessa stopped by, unannounced, holding 2 slices of pizza and a bottle of wine. She plopped onto my couch. You look like someone just deleted your personality. I laughed quietly. Close. My family tried to rewrite it. She poured wine into mugs because neither of us ever had clean glasses and handed me one. So, what's the next move? I don't know yet, I said. But something has to change. Tessa studied me for a moment, her eyes narrowing. You've got that look again. What look? The one that says you're about to do something dangerously calm. I smiled. Maybe calm is overdue. She took a sip of wine. You could confront Clara publicly. Post proof, show everyone she lied. I shook my head. That's what she'd expect. She wants noise. I want balance. Tessa grinned. Balance, huh? Sounds like your version of revenge. I didn't deny it. After she left, I stayed on the couch, lights off, city glow flickering against the walls. My laptop sat on the coffee table, the jeweler's email still open in the corner of the screen. At the bottom was the line, verification available upon request of registered owner. I hovered over it for a moment, then clicked request. The confirmation email came seconds later. I leaned back, exhaling. Outside, thunder rolled softly, echoing through the night. I whispered to no one. Let's see how perfect she looks when the truth shows up. It wasn't rage I felt. It was balance, cold, deliberate, and steady. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one being erased. I was the one holding the pen. The day after I sent the verification request, the rain finally stopped. The city smelled clean-washed, but I wasn't. I woke early, unable to shake the restless pulse in my chest. The confirmation email from Lawson Jewelers sat unopened in my inbox. I didn't have to read it to know what it said. My name, the serial number. Ownership confirmed. By noon, I was sitting in their small downtown office, the same place Ethan and I had gone to choose the ring a year ago. The gold letters on the glass door shimmered faintly in the sunlight. Lawson Jewelers. Since 1948. Inside, everything was too bright, too quiet. Mr. Lawson looked up from behind the counter when I walked in, his gray eyes soft with recognition. "Miss Bennet," he said. "I wondered when you'd stop by." I managed a smile. "You remember me," he nodded. "People rarely forget the ones who choose something with meaning." He gestured for me to sit. "I got your email. It's been a while since we've had a case like this." "Case," I repeated, tasting the word. He folded his hands. "Your sister's wedding planner called us last week. She wanted to schedule a polishing and resize for the ring before the ceremony." My fingers curled against my knee. "Of course she did." I confirmed the serial number before agreeing. He continued. "When I saw your name still registered as the owner, I filed a notice with our insurer. If the ring appears for professional servicing again, it triggers a verification report. So if she tries to bring it in again," he gave a small, calm smile, "the system flags it automatically." "Does she know that?" "Not yet," he said. "But she will." Something in his voice, steady, factual, made me feel grounded for the first time in weeks. "She told everyone I was being dramatic," I said quietly. "Maybe now she'll understand that truth doesn't need drama." Mr. Lawson studied me for a moment. "Justice isn't loud, Miss Bennet. It's precise." I nodded. "That's exactly what I need it to be." When I left the shop, sunlight hit the wet pavement, scattering light across puddles. I stood there for a minute, breathing in the sharp scent of metal and rain, thinking how odd it was that peace could sound like traffic and feel like a weapon finally polished. That evening, Ethan came over again. He brought takeout from my favorite Thai place, trying too hard to make it feel normal. "I stopped by your parents' house," he said between bites. "Why would you do that? Your mom called me." I groaned. "Of course she did. She said you've been cold to Clara and that you're trying to ruin her wedding." I stared at him. "You don't believe that, do you?" "No," he said quickly, "but I think they actually believe it." "Good," I said flatly. "Let them. It'll make what's coming even harder to rewrite." He set down his fork. "Hannah, just tell me you're not going to do anything reckless." I smiled faintly. "Reckless is what they call it when they don't understand control." He sighed. "I just want to make sure you don't get hurt again." "Ethan," I said, leaning back, "I'm already hurt. This is just me deciding what the scar will look like." He didn't argue after that. He just reached for my hand. His thumb brushed the pale indentation on my finger, where the ring used to be. "It still feels strange," he murmured. "Good," I said. "It means it mattered." When he left later that night, I stood at the window, long after his car disappeared down the street. The moonlight hit the empty spot on my hand, soft but deliberate, like a reminder. Some things aren't gone, they're just waiting to be claimed again. The next day, I got an email from Lawson Jewelers. The subject line read, "Update. Verification in progress." My pulse kicked. The message was brief, clinical, and perfect. "Per your request, verification documentation will be executed on the morning of the Moore wedding at Seafront Grand Hotel. Attendance confirmed, jeweler representative, insurer, and venue management." I read it 3 times. The calm that came after wasn't triumph. It was something colder. Precision settling into place. That afternoon, Tessa dropped by. She was carrying bagels and gossip as always. "So," she said, eyeing me as she bit into one. "What's next? Lawson's handling it." She blinked. "Handling what?" "The verification." "At the wedding." Her jaw dropped. "You mean during the ceremony?" I nodded. Tessa leaned forward. "You realize that's going to be explosive, right?" "Not explosive," I said, taking a sip of coffee. "Just visible." She whistled low. "God, you're terrifying when you're calm." I smiled faintly. "Clara once said I'd never do anything unpredictable." Maybe she was wrong. Tessa sat back, shaking her head. "You know, part of me wants to talk you out of this." "Then why don't you?" "Because the rest of me wants front row seats." I laughed quietly. "Bring your camera." That night I didn't sleep. I sat by the window, the city humming below, the clock ticking loud in the silence. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel powerless. Every breath felt measured, deliberate. Around midnight, I opened the email again, tracing the lines of the message with my eyes. Verification at Seafront Grand Hotel. Registered owner Hannah Bennett. I whispered it aloud. Registered owner. It sounded like an oath. I thought of Clara's laugh, of Mom's dismissive tone, of every moment I'd been told to be quiet. For years, I'd been the shadow in their stories. But shadows, I realized, don't vanish. They just wait for the right light. When dawn came, I brewed coffee and watched the city wake. My inbox pinged again, Lawson, confirming one final detail. Everything was ready. The message ended with 2 words, "See you there." I closed my laptop, poured another cup of coffee, and whispered, "Yes, you will." The day stretched ahead, bright and calm. Too calm. But calm, I'd learned, is just the surface before something breaks through. I picked up my camera from the shelf, the one I hadn't used in months. The lens caught the sunlight, scattering it into tiny flecks across my wall. "Time to get this in focus," I said softly. The reflection staring back at me wasn't the woman who'd begged for peace at family dinners or the one who cried over stolen promises. It was someone sharper, steadier, ready. By the time the evening came, I had already packed my bag, documents, camera, one black dress. The same one I'd worn to that first dinner, the one Clara said made me look too serious. Maybe she was right. Serious women don't start fires. They end them. 3 days before the wedding, the city felt like it was holding its breath. Portland in early May always carried that strange mix of warmth and chill sunlight on one side of the street wind, cold enough to remind you not to trust it. I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by open folders, contracts, receipts, email printouts. Every document tied back to the same thing, the ring, the verification, and the wedding that wasn't mine anymore. Tessa was sprawled across the couch, scrolling on her phone. "You realize this whole thing is turning into a movie, right?" she said. "It's not a movie," I murmured, highlighting a line on one of the contracts. "It's just paperwork." "Yeah," she said dryly. "The kind of paperwork that ends with slow-motion gasps and a public meltdown." I looked up. "I'm not doing this to humiliate her." Tessa raised an eyebrow. "Then what do you call it?" "Correction," I said simply. "You can't humiliate someone with the truth." She smiled. "You really believe that I didn't answer?" Instead, I gathered the papers into neat stacks. The more organized it looked, the calmer I felt. Every folder was a piece of armor, evidence, order, logic. No emotion left to weaponize against me. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. When I answered, a smooth voice greeted me. "Miss Bennett. This is Mrs. Green from the insurance department at Lawson Jewelers. Just confirming our attendance at the Seafront Grand Hotel on the day of the event." "Everything is set?" I asked. "Yes," she said. "Our records and Mr. Lawson's verification report are ready. If the ring is presented for authentication, the record will reflect its true ownership. We'll also have a venue representative present per protocol." "Good," I said. "Make sure the record is clear." "It already is," she replied. "Justice tends to look cleaner on paper." When I hung up, I realized I was smiling for the first time in weeks. That night, I dreamt of the ocean. Not peaceful waves or sunsets, but deep, dark water, the kind that hides everything beneath. In the dream, Clara was standing on the pier, smiling into the sun, unaware of the tide rising behind her. And when the wave came, it didn't crash. It simply lifted her off the ground and carried her away. I woke before dawn, the sound of my own breathing loud in the quiet apartment. The first thing I did was reach for my camera. I hadn't taken a photo in months. I turned it on and let the familiar click echo through the room. It sounded like a heartbeat. By noon, I was at a small cafe downtown meeting Mr. Lawson. He sat across from me, his posture impeccable, a man used to order and truth. "Miss Bennett," he said, sipping his espresso, "I received an updated call sheet from the hotel. They confirmed the time and location. The verification will take place at 10:45, right before the ceremony begins." I nodded. "And you'll be there personally?" "Yes," he said, "along with our insurance representative. They've been briefed. What about her? She has no idea, he replied, sliding a sealed envelope toward me. Here's a copy of the ownership certificate. Keep it. Once the verification begins, it will be public record. I took the envelope, running my fingers along its crisp edges. Thank you. He smiled faintly. You remind me of my wife, he said. She used to say silence is the sharpest blade. She was right, I said quietly. When I left the cafe, the air smelled like rain again. I tilted my face up to the gray sky, letting the wind sting my skin. For the first time, I wasn't hiding from the storm. I was walking into it. That evening, Ethan showed up unannounced. He looked uneasy, holding a paper bag of takeout like it might shield him. I talked to your dad today, he said. Oh, he said Clara's freaking out. Apparently, she heard you've been talking to the jeweler. She's not wrong, he sighed. He begged me to convince you to back off, said this will destroy her. I crossed my arms. Funny. I've been destroyed plenty of times and nobody ever seemed that worried. Ethan set the bag down. I know. But I'm asking you as me, not them. Are you sure this is what you want? I met his eyes. Yes, because it's not about wanting anymore. It's about finishing. He nodded slowly. Then I'll be there. You don't have to. I know. But I will. The room went quiet. Outside, the rain started again, gentle this time. He looked around at the scattered papers on my table. You've planned every detail, haven't you? Everyone, I said. That's the difference between revenge and chaos. Ethan smiled faintly. You know you used to photograph weddings. I used to believe in them, I said. He didn't argue. He just reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind my ear before leaving. When the door closed, I sat in the silence he left behind. It didn't hurt anymore. It just felt clean. That night, I laid out everything for the next day: black dress, camera, envelope, heels. I packed them carefully like a soldier folding a uniform. Before bed, I stood by the window watching the city lights shimmer across the wet streets. My phone buzzed. Mom. I almost ignored it, but curiosity won. Her message was short. Please, Hannah, don't ruin this for your sister. Family first. I stared at the words until they blurred. Then I typed back, I am putting family first, Mom. Just not the way you meant. I didn't hit send. I deleted it, set the phone face down, and whispered, tomorrow I don't need to speak. The truth will. When morning came, I woke before the alarm. The world outside was quiet, the kind of calm that hides something underneath. I made coffee, watched the steam rise, and thought of all the times I'd been told to wait, to forgive, to let it go. Forgiveness is beautiful, they said. But no one ever talks about how heavy it becomes when you're the only one carrying it. I slipped on the black dress, tied my hair back, and picked up the envelope. As I locked the door, the air felt charged, almost electric. I could smell the ocean miles away. The final message came in from Tessa just as I started the car. I'm already at the venue. Front row. You sure about this? I typed back completely. Her reply came instantly. Then, let's make history. The engine hummed steady and low. I looked out at the road stretching ahead, wet silver, endless, and smiled. The calm before the storm isn't peace. It's precision. And I was ready. A week passed and the city began to hum with spring weddings. My inbox was full of automated congratulations from vendors, as if the universe were mocking me with reminders of what was supposed to be mine. Every time I saw Clara's name in a headline, social media star marries at Seafront Grand, my stomach turned. She'd managed to spin the narrative again. The internet had forgotten the ring was stolen. The world was ready to adore her all over. I didn't post, didn't comment, didn't fight. My silence wasn't surrender anymore, it was strategy. That Friday morning, sunlight poured across my kitchen table. I sat there with a cup of coffee and a thick folder of papers. Ownership certificate, insurance correspondence, Lawson's letter, all neatly stacked. Everything was ready. I ran my fingers over the envelope one last time before sliding it into my bag. At exactly 10 a.m., my phone buzzed. Mr. Lawson's name appeared on the screen. "Miss Bennet," he said when I answered. His voice carried that same calm authority I'd come to rely on. "Just confirming our schedule for the verification." The planner arranged for the inspection to take place before the ceremony, 10:45 in the ballroom. "And you'll be there, yes. I'll have the certificate, the serial number, and the official record from our insurer. The venue staff will be present as witnesses." "Good," I said quietly. "Let's make sure it's done right." He paused. "Miss Bennet, I've done this work for 30 years. Trust me, truth doesn't need to be rushed. It just needs to be undeniable." When the call ended, I sat for a long moment staring out the window. The world outside looked deceptively calm, like the surface of water before it swallows the shore. That afternoon, I met Tessa at a cafe near the station. She was already there, 2 cappuccinos waiting, her sunglasses perched on her head like armor. "You look terrifyingly composed," she said. "I've had practice," I replied. "So this is it. No last-minute doubts," I shook my head. "There's no room for doubt when the truth's already written." She leaned forward. "You know you're about to do something that people only fantasize about. Real justice. Real exposure." "It's not about exposure," I said. "It's about balance. She took too much space in every story. I'm just reclaiming mine." Tessa smiled, her tone softer now. "You sound like someone who finally stopped apologizing." "I did," I said, "for the first time in my life." We sat there in silence for a while, the city noise muffled through the glass. When we left, she hugged me tight. "Call me the second it's done," she said. "And Hannah, don't let anyone make you feel guilty for surviving." The sky had turned pale by the time I got home. I stood by the window watching clouds stretch over the skyline. For years I'd believed justice was loud, shouting, confrontation, tears, but the older I got, the more I realized it could be quiet too. Precise. I thought about Mr. Lawson's words, "Justice isn't loud, it's precise." That night my phone buzzed again, Dad. I almost ignored it, but I answered anyway. "Your mother wants you to come to the wedding," he said. "She says it would mean a lot." "Mean a lot to who?" "To her. To Clara. To the family." I laughed softly. The family didn't mean much when they watched me fall apart. "Hannah," his voice was low, hesitant. "You've always been stronger than your sister. We just thought you could handle things better." "That's not strength, Dad," I said. "That's neglect, dressed up as faith." He went quiet. "She's your sister." "I know," I said. "That's why I'm letting her face the truth herself." When the call ended, I stared at my reflection in the dark window. The woman looking back wasn't angry. She was steady, almost serene. The next morning, Mr. Lawson called again. "We're officially confirmed for the venue tomorrow," he said. "Everything is in order. Once the verification begins, it cannot be undone." "Perfect," I said. He hesitated. "You seem calm, Miss Bennet." "I am," I replied. "Calm isn't weakness, it's precision." He chuckled softly. "You remind me of my late wife. She used to say revenge is just truth with good timing." "Then I guess it's almost time," I said. After the call, I packed my things. Black dress, camera, the folder of documents, one small envelope for myself. The rhythm of it folding, checking, locking was soothing. Control one task at a time. By evening, I went down to the lakefront. The wind carried salt and memory. I sat on a bench, watching the light fade over the water. Couples strolled by, kids laughed, boats cut across the reflection of the city. I wondered if Clara felt this kind of calm before her own storm, if she could feel the truth closing in. My phone buzzed. A new message from Mom: "Please don't cause a scene tomorrow. Your sister deserves her day." I stared at it, then typed back, "She'll have her day, just not the one she planned." I didn't send it. I didn't need to. Some messages didn't need to be delivered to be understood. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat at the window with a cup of tea, watching the streetlights blur through the glass. I thought about all the times I'd been told to stay quiet, to forgive, to be the bigger person. Every time I obeyed it made me smaller until I didn't recognize myself. Not anymore. At dawn, I packed my bag. The city was just beginning to wake, birds breaking through the morning mist, buses sighing down the street. I brewed coffee and took a slow sip, letting the warmth settle in my chest. It was strange how calm I felt. Not excitement, not fear, just certainty. Before leaving, I checked my messages one last time. There was a text from Tessa, "I'll be at the seafront by 9. Front row." And yes, I brought my camera. Another one from Ethan, "Whatever happens today, I'm proud of you." And a third from Mom. Short, sharp, final, "Behave yourself, Hannah. Don't ruin this family again." I smiled faintly. "I'm not ruining anything," I whispered. "I'm just returning what was mine." When I stepped outside, the air was crisp, almost sweet. The sea breeze carried the scent of salt and lilies, the flowers Clara had chosen for her wedding. The sun was rising pale gold against the horizon. I walked toward my car, heels clicking softly on the pavement, and thought of one last line Mr. Lawson had said: "Justice doesn't need to shout. It just needs to arrive on time." Tomorrow it would. As I drove down the highway toward the coast, the clouds began to lift, streaks of light cutting through the gray. I rolled the window down, letting the wind whip through my hair. The world felt wide, endless, alive again. Somewhere behind me, Clara was rehearsing her vows. Somewhere ahead, the truth was waiting, and for once I didn't feel like running from it. I whispered to the wind, "Let the calm end." The morning of the wedding arrived like a secret that everyone already knew. The sky hung heavy with a gray calm, the kind that comes before thunder. I woke before my alarm, the air in my apartment still and expectant. For a moment I sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the faint hum of the city, the echo of footsteps in the hallway outside, the distant sound of seagulls over the harbor. Today wasn't about chaos. It was about clarity. I brewed coffee, the smell grounding me. On the counter sat my black dress, the one Clara had mocked months ago, saying it made me look too severe. I smiled faintly as I slipped it on. Maybe severe was exactly what today needed. My reflection in the mirror looked calm. Too calm maybe, but the stillness in my chest wasn't emptiness. It was focus. At 9 my phone buzzed. "Tessa at the venue. It's beautiful. Shame it's about to turn into history." I replied with a single word: "Soon." By 10 I was in my car driving down the coast. The seafront Grand rose out of the mist like a ship made of glass and stone. The parking lot shimmered with polished cars, photographers already setting up outside the arched entrance. I parked at the far end and sat there for a minute, watching guests in pastel dresses and tailored suits step out, laughing, posing for photos. From this distance it looked perfect. The illusion always did. Inside, the air was thick with flowers and anticipation. White roses, gold, accents the faint sound of a string quartet tuning their instruments. The hotel staff moved like clockwork, checking details, polishing glassware. No one noticed me slip in through the side corridor. I flashed my vendor badge, one Tessa had printed for me just in case, and walked down the hall toward the ballroom. The doors were half open. I paused in the doorway. The space gleamed, crystal chandeliers, mirrored walls, every table draped in ivory silk. At the center stood the altar, lined with lilies and candles. Clara's dream, I thought. My design. I spotted Tessa near the back, pretending to check lighting equipment. When she caught my eye, she gave a tiny nod. Across the room, Mr. Lawson was already there, talking quietly with a hotel manager. He looked composed, clipboard in hand, his gray suit immaculate. I took a deep breath and stepped inside. "Miss Bennett," he greeted softly when he saw me. "Right on time. Always," I said. He handed me a copy of the verification report. "We'll proceed once the ring is presented for inspection." The planner insisted on one last polish before the ceremony. "Perfect," I said. From the hallway came the sound of laughter. Familiar, bright, performative. "Clara." I didn't turn. I didn't need to. I'd recognize that voice anywhere. She swept in moments later, surrounded by bridesmaids and photographers, her dress glimmering like frost under the lights. When her eyes met mine, she froze. "Hannah," she said, her voice cracking slightly. "What are you doing here?" I smiled. "Supporting my sister." She blinked, unsure whether to believe me. "That's unexpected." "Life's full of surprises," I said. Before she could respond, the wedding planner appeared, flustered and breathless. "Miss Moore, Mr. Lawson is ready for the final inspection. It's just a formality before the ceremony." Clara turned to him, beaming again for the cameras. "Of course, we wouldn't want anything less than perfect." Mr. Lawson nodded politely. "If you'll hand me the ring, we'll make this quick." She slipped it off with a dramatic flourish, holding it up to the light. "Isn't it gorgeous?" she said loudly for everyone to hear. "My fiancé has excellent taste." The room murmured approval. I stood near the back, expression unreadable. "Mr." Lawson examined the ring carefully, turning it under the chandelier light. He glanced at his clipboard, then at the insurance rep standing beside him. "Excuse me, Miss Moore," he said calmly. "Can you confirm where this ring was purchased?" Clara frowned. "Lawson Jewelers, of course." "Why?" He nodded. And when she hesitated, her smile faltering. "A few months ago." Mr. Lawson's expression didn't change. "That's interesting," he said evenly, "because according to our records, this particular ring was purchased by Miss Hannah Bennett nearly a year ago and reported missing shortly thereafter." The silence that followed felt like a held breath snapping. Guests shifted in their seats. The planner froze mid-step. Someone dropped a champagne flute. It shattered like punctuation. Clara's face went white. What are you talking about?" she stammered. Mr. Lawson held up the certificate. "Serial number 84952B, registered under Hannah Bennett. Verified owner." He turned to the hotel manager. "Under policy, any disputed item must be secured until ownership is confirmed. I'll have to ask security to hold the ring." The manager nodded, signaling to two staff members near the door. Clara's voice rose brittle. "No, this is ridiculous. It's my ring, he gave it to me." Mr. Lawson's tone stayed perfectly calm. "Perhaps, but legally, it isn't yours to give." The crowd was whispering now, a low tide of curiosity and judgment. Tessa's camera clicked softly from somewhere near the back. Clara turned toward me, eyes blazing. "You planned this," she spat. I tilted my head slightly. "I filed a report," I said. "The rest handled itself." "Mom!" she shouted suddenly, scanning the crowd. "Do something!" Our mother stood near the front row, pale and rigid, clutching her clutch bag like a weapon. "Clara, just calm down." "Calm down," Clara's voice cracked. "She's trying to ruin me." Mr. Lawson stepped aside. "Ma'am, if you'd prefer to discuss this privately." "No!" Clara snapped, spinning toward the guests. "Everyone should hear this. My sister's obsessed with me. She's jealous. She's been trying to destroy my wedding from the start." I met her gaze evenly. "No, Clara. I tried to warn you. You just thought I wouldn't fight back." For a long second, the room held its breath. Then, as if on cue, the hotel security stepped forward. "Ma'am," one said quietly, "we need to retrieve the ring until the investigation is resolved." Clara clutched it tighter, shaking her head. "You're not taking it." Mom moved toward her, whispering urgently, but Clara jerked away, tears streaking her mascara. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" she screamed at me. I looked at her, my voice steady. "I stopped pretending you could steal from me and still call it love." Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Security escorted her toward a side room. "Mr. Lawson turned to me, his expression unreadable but respectful. "We'll ensure the report is finalized by end of day," he said. "Thank you," I whispered. Guests began to leave, murmuring confused. The music had stopped, the illusion gone. As I walked out of the ballroom, Tessa caught up to me. "Holy hell," she breathed. "That was necessary," I said. She nodded. "Yeah, but also legendary." Outside, the wind had picked up, carrying the scent of salt and roses. I stood at the top of the hotel steps, the ocean stretching endless and cold before me. My hands were steady, my breath slow. Behind me, chaos rumbled. But out here, everything was quiet. It wasn't victory I felt. Not even relief. Just balance. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I felt seen. The video hit the internet before the champagne on the tables had even gone flat. I didn't post it. I didn't need to. Someone had filmed the entire confrontation, the jeweler's calm voice, the serial number, the moment Clara's face drained of color. By evening, it was everywhere. Bride exposed for wearing stolen engagement ring. Family drama unfolds at luxury seafront wedding. Sister's revenge or justice served. Every title sounded like fiction, but every frame was real. I stayed off social media that night. I didn't want to watch the chaos I'd started. But by the next morning, even the quiet corners of the internet were humming with it. My phone buzzed nonstop messages, missed calls, notifications. Mom, Dad, distant relatives I hadn't heard from in years. Some messages were full of disbelief, others dripping with outrage. A few, surprisingly, with admiration. When I finally picked up a call, it was Tessa. "You're trending," she said before I could say hello. "Don't tell me that. I'm serious. You're all over TikTok." #number Ringgate? I sighed. "Of course there's a hashtag." Tessa's tone softened. "You okay? I don't know," I said honestly. "It doesn't feel like victory. It feels like standing in the middle of a quiet battlefield after everyone's gone home." "Then maybe that's what peace feels like," she said. I didn't answer. I didn't know yet if peace could sound that loud. By noon, Mom showed up at my apartment. She didn't knock. She never did. She looked exhausted, her hair immaculate as always, but her eyes swollen and sharp. "How could you?" were her first words. I stayed by the counter, coffee in hand. "How could I what? Tell the truth. You humiliated your sister in front of 200 people. She humiliated herself the day she took something that wasn't hers." Mom's voice trembled, a dangerous mix of fury and fear. "You've ruined her life." "She ruined mine first," I said calmly. "And you helped her." "That's not fair," she snapped. "Neither was spending months planning my wedding just for you to laugh when she stole it from me." Mom's expression hardened. "You've always had a flair for drama." I laughed bitterly. "And you've always had a talent for denial." Her voice dropped low. "You think this makes you righteous. You think destroying your family proves a point." I met her gaze unflinching. "It's not about destruction. It's about correction." She stared at me for a long moment, searching for guilt that wasn't there. When she didn't find it, she exhaled sharply and turned toward the door. "Your father's disappointed," she said over her shoulder. "Tell him I'm not," I replied. When the door shut, I let the silence sink in. It didn't ache the way it used to. It felt like air finally returning to lungs that had been held too long underwater. Later that evening, I opened my laptop. News sites had already picked up the story. The comment section was a battlefield, half the world cheering, the other half condemning. One line caught my eye: "Sometimes truth has perfect timing." I smiled faintly. Whoever wrote that understood more than they knew. The next morning, Dad called. His voice was weary, almost brittle. "Your mother's not taking this well," he said. "I noticed. She says you've made the family a laughingstock. Maybe she should have thought about that before she laughed at me." He sighed heavily. "You sound just like her when you're angry." "I'm not angry," I said softly. "I'm finally done." He was quiet for a long time before saying, "Clara hasn't left the house. She won't talk to anyone. She'll survive." "She's your sister." "I know," I said. "But maybe it's time she learned that sisterhood isn't immunity." He didn't know what to say to that. He just muttered something about wishing things had gone differently before hanging up. That night, I went for a walk along the waterfront. The city was alive, but the air felt still around me. I thought about Clara, about how easily she'd twisted everything over the years, our parents, the narrative, even my silence. She was a master at control, but only as long as no one questioned her script. And now her story had unraveled in front of the world. Tessa joined me halfway down the pier, holding 2 coffees. You look like you're processing, she said. Always, I replied. She leaned on the railing beside me. You know, everyone's talking about how savage that was, but no one's mentioning the part where you didn't even raise your voice. That's what made it hit harder. I didn't need to scream, I said. The truth did that for me. She nodded quiet for a moment. You think they'll ever forgive you? I looked out at the dark water. Forgiveness is for people who plan to go back. I don't. The sound of waves against the pier filled the silence that followed. It was almost soothing. The next day, an email came from Mr. Lawson. Short, professional, but satisfying. Ownership verified. Report closed. Refund for legal filing fees attached. Pleasure working with you, Miss Bennett. I replied simply. Thank you for your precision. By evening, the shockwave had fully hit our small community. Friends of friends texted to check in, which was code for wanting gossip. A few old college acquaintances sent congratulatory messages like I'd just won an award instead of reclaiming my dignity. And then there was the one message that stopped me cold. From Clara. It came late, nearly midnight. Just a single line, I hope it was worth it. I stared at the screen, the cursor blinking. After a moment, I typed back. It was, because it's over. Then I deleted it and turned off my phone. For years, I'd begged for peace. But now that I had it, I realized peace wasn't gentle. It was sharp. It cut through everything false until only truth remained. The following morning, a small brown envelope arrived at my door. No return address, just my name, scrawled in a familiar hand. I opened it carefully. Inside was a single photograph, Clara and me at ages 10 and 14, smiling on the porch of our old house, her arms slung around my shoulder. On the back, in her looping handwriting, were 5 words. We were happy once, right? I set the photo on the table and stared at it for a long time. The memory didn't hurt. It just existed, suspended between what was and what couldn't be again. By the afternoon, the media frenzy had already started to fade. There was always another scandal to replace the last. But for me, the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was freedom. I spent the rest of the day cleaning my apartment, throwing out old wedding folders, deleting emails, reclaiming space. When I was done, I stood in the middle of my living room, the afternoon light, spilling through the window, and realized something simple: I didn't need a wedding to feel whole. That night, I took my camera down to the pier again. The sun was setting, turning the water gold. I lifted the lens and framed the horizon, capturing the moment the light hit just right. The image on the screen was imperfect, blurry, wind-shaken, but real. For the first time in months, I smiled. When I got home, I wrote one line in my notebook before going to bed: revenge wasn't the ending. It was the correction. And with that, I closed the book, turned off the light, and let the quiet finally be enough. 3 days after the wedding disaster, the world had already moved on, but my family hadn't. The headlines had faded, the memes had been replaced by new ones, and strangers had stopped whispering about the stolen ring bride. But inside my parents' house, silence had hardened into something colder than anger. I hadn't heard from them since Mom's visit. No calls, no texts. The quiet should have felt peaceful, but it carried the weight of a storm waiting to strike again. That morning, a letter arrived in my mailbox. White envelope. My name written in Mom's perfect, careful cursive. I stared at it for a long time before taking it inside. The paper felt heavier than it should. When I opened it, her words were as sharp as her perfume. Hannah, you've embarrassed this family beyond words. Clara may never recover from what you've done. Your father and I are humiliated. We raised you to be better than this, to be gracious, to protect your sister. Instead, you've proven that bitterness rules your heart. I don't know if I can ever forgive you. Please do not contact us. There was no love, Mom, just Margaret. I sat at the kitchen table reading it twice. By the second time, the words stopped stinging. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the drawer where I kept old bills and broken pens, things that once mattered but didn't anymore. An hour later, Tessa showed up, letting herself in as always. One look at my face, and she asked, "What happened?" I handed her the letter. She read it quickly, jaw tightening with each line. Wow, she said finally. She really knows how to turn guilt into an art form. She's fluent in it, I said, trying to smile. Tessa folded the paper, sliding it back toward me. You don't have to let this in. I already did, I said quietly. I just decided not to build a home for it. She smiled faintly. Good. That's progress. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat on the floor of my studio, surrounded by old photographs, smiling brides, glowing couples, fathers giving away daughters. They all looked so alive, so sure of themselves. But to me they looked staged now. I picked up one print, a bride laughing under string lights, her face radiant. Once I would have called it perfect. Now it just looked like illusion. I reached for my camera, dusted it off, and set it on the tripod. For a long time I stared at the lens. Then, without thinking, I hit the timer and sat down in front of it. No makeup, no practiced smile, just me. When the shutter clicked, the sound startled me. The photo that came out wasn't flattering. My eyes were red, my lips pressed tight between exhaustion and defiance. But it was real, the most honest picture I'd ever taken. The next morning, I sent it to Maria, an old photographer friend who ran a small gallery downtown. I wrote, I don't know why I'm sending you this, but I think I finally captured something true. She replied an hour later. It's haunting, Hannah. You should show it. People need to see what truth looks like. Her words sat in my mind all day, echoing. For the first time, I thought about creating something that wasn't for clients or family approval, something that was just for me. By afternoon, I had pulled out a notebook and started sketching ideas. A photography series, not about weddings or perfection, but about aftermath. About what happens when you stop pretending to belong. The title came easily, uninvited. That evening, Ethan stopped by with groceries. He looked around at the chaos photos everywhere, the notebook open on the table, and smiled. You're working again. Something like that, I said. He studied the self-portrait pinned to the wall. This one's different. It's not pretty, I said. No, he agreed, but it's honest. Maybe that's better. I exhaled, unsure if it was relief or fear. Maria thinks I should show it. She's right, he said softly. It's time. That night I stayed up until 2 a.m., editing, arranging, rethinking. Every image I'd taken over the years looked different now. I saw the lies in them, the smiles that hid exhaustion, the embraces staged for cameras. The new shots I took were raw, imperfect, sometimes even blurry. But they felt alive. Days passed like that. My apartment became a maze of photographs, faces, hands, empty spaces, fragments of truth. Tessa called it beautiful chaos. You realize you're turning pain into art, right? She said one night, while helping me hang prints on the wall. I'm just turning it into something I can live with, I said. When Maria visited a week later, she walked through the apartment, slowly studying each image in silence. When she stopped, her eyes glistened. These aren't revenge, she said quietly. They're rebirth. She turned to me. I want to exhibit them. My breath caught. You're serious. Completely, she said. People need to see what survival looks like when it stops apologizing. I didn't answer right away. The thought of standing in a room surrounded by my own scars made my chest tighten. But somewhere under the fear, I felt something else. Something steady. Okay, I said finally. Let's do it. The weeks that followed felt like therapy disguised as work. Maria helped me select and frame the best shots. We met late nights at the gallery, arranging prints, along white walls, adjusting lights. She wanted the room to feel quiet, heavy, like the breath after a storm. One evening, while she was labeling the final pieces, she asked, "Are you ready for people to see you like this?" I thought about Clara, about Mom, about the versions of me they'd created. The quiet one, the bitter one. The problem. They've already seen me wrong, I said. Maybe it's time they see me real. Maria smiled. Then let's make sure the world listens. The opening was set for a Friday night. I didn't tell my family. I didn't post it online. I wanted to see who came for the art, not the gossip. On the morning of the show, I woke up early. Sunlight spilled through my blinds, painting gold across the floor. I brewed coffee, then stood by the window watching the city come alive. For the first time in years, I felt something like peace, not fragile, not temporary, solid. Tessa picked me up that evening wearing a dress that sparkled like rebellion. "You ready?" she asked. "As I'll ever be." When we arrived, the gallery was already humming. Strangers drifted between the photographs, whispering, pausing. Some smiled sadly, others stood still, just staring. Watching them was surreal, like letting people read a diary I'd never meant to share. A woman in her 50s approached me. "You took these?" she asked. "Yes. They're painful," she said softly, "but beautiful. It's like you made grief look alive." "Pain is still life," I said. "I just stopped hiding it." She nodded, tears in her eyes. "Thank you for that." When she walked away, I felt something shift inside me. The story had outgrown the pain. It was no longer just mine. Later that night, as the gallery lights dimmed and the last guests left, Maria handed me a glass of wine. "You did it," she said. I smiled. "No, I just stopped running." Outside, the city glowed under a soft drizzle. For once, I didn't need a storm to feel powerful. I already had the calm. As we locked up, Maria turned to me. "What's next for you, Hannah?" I looked back at the photos, at the quiet faces staring out from the walls. "Maybe I'll keep telling the truth," I said. "It's the only language that finally fits." When I got home, I poured the last of the wine and stood by the window watching the lights shimmer on the wet pavement. The silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt earned. I took out my camera and snapped one last picture, my reflection in the glass city lights behind me. No filters, no poses, no fear. For the first time, I liked what I saw. The article came out on a Tuesday morning. I wasn't expecting it. I was sitting in my kitchen half asleep, a cup of coffee growing cold beside me, when Maria's email hit my inbox. The subject line said, "You're on the front page." I clicked the link, and there it was, my name, printed in bold above a glossy headline that made my stomach twist. "The photographer who turned betrayal into art." The piece was kind, thoughtful even. It described Uninvited as a haunting meditation on family silence and survival, and called me an artist who redefined honesty through imperfection. It quoted Maria, it quoted Ethan, it even quoted one of the women from the opening night. But beneath every sentence, I could hear the whisper of something else, the sound of my mother's voice trembling with fury. By noon, it came true. She left a voicemail, her tone icy and restrained, like she was reading from a script. "You've humiliated us again," she said. "Now the world knows our private affairs. How could you do this to your own family?" I didn't respond. I just sat there listening until her voice faded into static. Then came Grace's text. "You really built a career off destroying me. Congrats." I typed a reply. "You built your image off erasing me. We're even," but deleted it before hitting send. I wasn't doing that dance anymore. Around lunchtime, Ethan showed up carrying sandwiches from the deli down the street. "You're trending again," he said, smiling gently. I groaned. "Don't tell me that." "It's not bad this time," he said. "You're all over the art blogs. People are calling you the new face of emotional realism." I laughed. "That sounds pretentious." He grinned. "Maybe. But it's also kind of perfect." He watched me as I ate, his expression softening. "How do you feel?" "Exposed," I admitted. "But not afraid." "Good," he said. "Because this," he gestured toward the laptop, toward the article, still glowing on the screen. "This isn't scandal anymore. It's survival turned into art. That's power." His words stayed with me after he left. Power. Not the loud kind, not the type that crushes, the kind that reclaims. Quiet, deliberate, unshakable. Later that evening, I got an email from an unknown address. The subject line read, "Your sister isn't doing well." For a long moment, I didn't open it. I didn't want to know. But curiosity won. It was from Dad. His tone was gentle, the way it always was when he wanted to soften bad news. "Grace has been staying with us. She's not sleeping, not eating much." I think she feels lost. She won't say it, but I know she's been reading the things written about you. Maybe you should call her." I stared at the words for a long time before closing the laptop. No, not yet. The next morning, I walked to the gallery early. Maria was there already crouched over a new set of frames, her silver hair catching the light. When she saw me, she smiled. "You're glowing," she said. "I didn't sleep," I replied. She laughed softly. "If exhaustion looks like peace, then I'll take it." We walked through the space together, quiet, except for the sound of her shoes against the floor. The walls were still lined with my photographs, each one a fragment of what had been broken. She stopped at one, the image of an empty chair bathed in morning light. "This one," she said, "feels like forgiveness." I didn't answer. I wasn't sure forgiveness was something I believed in anymore. But the light in that picture, it was softer than I remembered. Maybe that was enough. When the gallery closed for the day, I went home, poured myself a glass of wine, and sat on the couch. The city buzzed quietly outside. My phone was on the table, Grace's contact still pinned at the top. My thumb hovered over her name for a long time before I finally pressed call. It rang 6 times before she answered. Her voice was tired, brittle. "I knew you'd call." "I wasn't going to," I said. "But Dad emailed me." She scoffed softly. "Of course he did. Always the messenger." There was a pause, long and awkward. I could hear faint music in the background, the kind you play when you don't want to sit in silence. "I saw the article," she said finally. "They made you sound like some kind of saint. The brave artist who found redemption through pain." "I didn't write it," I said quietly. "But you lived it," she snapped. "And I'm the villain now, again." "You made yourself the villain," I said. "When you took my ring and called me bitter." "You could have just said no," she said. "You didn't have to destroy everything." "I did say no," I replied. "You just never listened." There was another silence. I almost hung up. Then she spoke again, her voice breaking. "I don't hate you," she whispered. "I just don't know how to forgive you." The words hit harder than I expected. I closed my eyes, letting them settle. "You don't have to," I said softly. "Just stop pretending I don't exist." She exhaled shakily. "Mom's sick of talking about it. Dad's pretending we're fine. And me, I can't go anywhere without people asking about you. I didn't want fame, Grace." "Maybe not," she said. "But you got it anyway." We both fell silent again. The distance between us felt wide and real, like an ocean we'd both given up trying to cross. Finally, I said the only thing that felt true. We were raised to compete for love that was never freely given. I stopped playing. "You can, too." For a moment, I thought she'd hang up. But then she said, barely audible, "I don't know who I am without it." "Then, find out," I said softly. "You might like her." When the call ended, I sat there for a long time staring at the city lights through the window. For the first time, I didn't feel angry at her, just sad for both of us. The next morning, another email from Dad. "Thank you for calling her," he wrote. She cried afterward. "I think she needed it. We all did." Attached was a blurry photo of Grace sitting on the porch of their house, her head tilted toward the light. It was unposed, unpolished. And for a moment, I saw what I'd always tried to capture: truth, quiet and unguarded. I closed the laptop and smiled faintly. Later that afternoon, Ethan came by with flowers. "For the famous artist," he said, setting them on the counter. "I don't think I'm famous," I said. "You are," he said gently, "to the right people." We sat by the window, the city glowing gold beneath the setting Sunday. He turned to me. "So what's next?" I thought for a moment. "Maybe a new series. Something about rebirth." He nodded. "Call it Light again. It suits you." I laughed quietly. "You're terrible at naming things," maybe, he said. "But I'm good at recognizing when someone's finally free." As the light faded, I rested my head on his shoulder. Outside, the city moved on, indifferent but alive. And for the first time, I didn't care who was watching, who was talking, or who was rewriting the story. Because this time the story was mine. The day of my second exhibit felt nothing like the first. There were no nerves this time, no trembling hands or racing heartbeats, just calm, the kind that comes after you've already lost everything you were afraid to lose. The new gallery was larger, brighter, with tall windows that caught the morning light and stretched it across the floors like gold silk. The series was called Light Again. Maria had insisted on the title. "It's who you are now," she'd said while hanging the final frame. "You took pain and turned it into proof." The room was filled with people I didn't know. Students, critics, artists, strangers who had seen the article and wanted to see if the woman behind the scandal could really make something beautiful out of ashes. I stood near the entrance greeting them as they drifted in. The walls were lined with new photos, softer ones this time. Empty rooms, open windows, hands brushing against sunlight. There was a tenderness in them I hadn't noticed until now. Maybe because I'd finally stopped needing to defend myself. Around noon, I saw him, Dad, standing by the doorway in his worn gray suit, shoulders slightly slumped. For a moment, I froze. Then he smiled, small and uncertain, and walked toward me. "You didn't think I'd miss this, did you?" he said. I smiled back. "I wasn't sure you'd come." He looked around the room, his eyes tracing each photo slowly. "Your mother didn't want me to," he admitted. "But sometimes you have to pick peace, not the person." Something inside me softened. "Thank you," I said quietly. We stood together for a long time, surrounded by whispers and camera shutters. He studied one photo, a self-portrait I'd taken the night after Grace's wedding, eyes red, but steady, a half smile that didn't quite reach my face. "These are honest," he said finally. "Your mother wouldn't understand them." "But I do." His voice broke slightly on the last word, and I saw something I hadn't seen in years: pride. Not pity, not disappointment, pride. He reached into his pocket and handed me a folded piece of paper. "She wanted me to give you this." I hesitated. "Another letter?" He nodded. "This one's different." When he walked away to look at another photo, I unfolded the note. The handwriting was shaky, uneven. "Hannah, I watched your interview. You looked calm. Maybe for the first time I saw you instead of the version I made you be. I don't expect forgiveness. I only want you to know I see what I missed. You were never too much. I was just too afraid of being less." It wasn't an apology, not exactly. But it was something close, something human. I blinked hard, fighting the sudden blur of tears. When I looked up, Ethan was standing across the room watching me. He smiled when our eyes met. I tucked the letter into my coat pocket and walked over to him. "You okay?" he asked softly. "I think so," I said. "She finally saw me." He smiled gently. "Took her long enough." I laughed through the ache. "Yeah, but I guess light travels slow." By late afternoon, the gallery was full. Maria gave a short speech, her voice echoing through the room. "This collection isn't just about healing," she said. "It's about reclamation. About the moment a woman stops editing herself to fit someone else's frame." People applauded, but I barely heard them. I was watching the sunlight crawl across the floor, golden and shifting. It touched the walls, the photographs, even the faces of the strangers who'd come to witness it. After the crowd began to thin, I stayed behind to help Maria close up. She looked at me with her knowing smile. "You did it," she said. I shook my head. "No, I just stopped breaking myself to fix everyone else." "That's the real art," she said. Outside, the sun was setting, throwing streaks of pink and amber across the sky. Ethan and I walked down the quiet street together, our hands brushing occasionally. "You know, it's funny," he said after a while. "The first time I saw you, you were behind a camera photographing someone else's story. Now the world's photographing yours." I smiled. Maybe that's what growing up is, realizing you were never just the observer. We stopped at a small cafe by the lake, the same one where I used to sit alone months ago, pretending the world didn't see me. The waitress recognized me from the article and brought over 2 drinks on the house. "For the brave one," she said with a wink. I laughed softly. "I'm not brave," I said. "I'm just done being quiet." Ethan leaned back, studying me. "So what now? What's next for the woman who became light?" I looked out at the lake where the water shimmered like molten glass. "Maybe I'll teach," I said. Workshops, maybe mentoring young photographers who've been too afraid to tell their stories? He nodded. You'd be good at that. I just want to remind people that truth doesn't always look perfect, I said. Sometimes it looks like survival, he smiled. That's your next headline. We left the cafe as the sky deepened into lavender. I stopped by the edge of the lake, pulled out my camera, and lifted it toward the horizon. The light was soft, imperfect human. I clicked the shutter. When I looked at the image on the screen, I smiled. It's not perfect, I said. Ethan glanced over my shoulder. That's why it's beautiful. We walked home as the city lights began to flicker on one by one like small promises against the dark. The air smelled faintly of rain, and for once I didn't rush to escape it. Later that night I sat on my balcony, the letter from my mother still in my pocket. I thought about everything that had led here, the lies, the silence, the ring, the humiliation, the truth. For the first time, none of it hurt. It just existed like chapters in a story that had finally found its ending. I lifted my camera one last time, pointed it at the skyline, and whispered, "Thank you." Not to them, but to the version of me who had finally stopped waiting to be chosen. The shutter clicked. Weeks later, Light Again was featured in Harper's Bazaar. The article called it a visual symphony of self-acceptance. They described me as the woman who redefined the art of reclamation. But the line that caught my breath was the last one. She no longer photographs Light. She has become it. The night the issue came out, Grace sent me a message. I saw the photos. They're beautiful. Maybe someday you can teach me how to see things the way you do. I stared at it for a long time before typing back. You already can. You just have to stop looking through Mom's lens. No bitterness, no blame, just truth. After I hit send, I stepped out onto the balcony. The city below shimmered with life, every window glowing like a heartbeat. I poured a glass of wine and leaned against the railing, breathing in the quiet. I had once been the sister, left out, the daughter silenced, the woman accused of being too much. Now I was the storyteller, the artist, the proof that light doesn't ask permission to exist. As the night deepened, I raised my camera one more time and took the picture. If you've ever been uninvited, remember your story doesn't need a door. You can build your own. And when you do, don't forget to tell me where you're watching from, because if you've ever had to fight for your own light, then you already know your glow was never theirs to keep.